All right, let's shift gears to the UFC here real quick. Dana White is talking about Francis Ngannou once again. Dana White is talking about Francis Ngannou once again. Not Francis Ngannou is talking about Dana White. Dana White is talking about Francis Ngannou once again. Will he say anything positive? Francis Ngannou has went through a lot this year, and he came back to MMA in devastating fashion, delivered once again, this time for the PFL, to become the heavyweight champion in the PFL. And he's the best heavyweight on the planet. Why? Because he never lost his belt in the UFC. So now he holds the belt in the PFL. Let's see if Dana had anything positive to say about Francis Ngannou.
It's all about the money. Francis left because he knew. I think that I'm going to tell you what I think about what Francis is all about the money. Francis left because he knew that if he fought John Jones and didn't win, it would hurt his chances of making the money that he wanted to make. But realistically, his deal was bigger here.
Do you guys see the contradiction there? Francis is all about the money. But realistically, his deal was bigger here. If he's all about the money, would he not stay with the UFC if his deal was bigger with the UFC? Yeah. Come on, man. Come on, man. We're just going to keep listening to this week after week. Dana just lying through his teeth and contradicting himself left and right. We're just going to listen to this. Come on, man. MMA fans can do better. Like, Dana has to be held accountable for this. You know, I like that Kevin Iole is there to, nudge back on Dana White nowadays in the press conferences. And he's usually the one that is getting Dana White to answer these tough questions. But, it's getting ridiculous at this point.
I think I've told this story a million times. They can deny it all they want. Why the fuck would I lie? What do I care? It doesn't matter to me one way.
He says, why would I lie? It doesn't matter to me one way or the other, right? Then why do you keep talking about it? Why do you keep bringing up Francis Ngannou in negative light? Why do you've got nothing positive to say about Francis Ngannou ever, but you don't care. You have no reason to lie. And if we're speaking about lies, shout out to Luke Thomas for breaking this down really well. He was talking about fighter pay as it pertains to the UFC and boxing. And these numbers will shock you. If you're a combat sports fan, these numbers will shock you.
But there's a couple of problems here with what Dana White said that really have to be acknowledged. Let's talk about just the basics overall. Let me show you some court documents from the UFC antitrust trial. This comes from the...
Now, if you guys are not familiar, the UFC had that antitrust lawsuit that was, basically settled a little while back, but apparently it's back on. And so there's court documents that came out. I mean, this is now proof of what the UFC is paying the fighters and what boxing promotions are paying their own fighters. So this is court documents. This is like literal proof of what is being paid. It's not hearsay no more. Like, you can't make numbers up anymore. These are court documents. Full on facts about fighter pay.
Plaintiffs, when they were cobbling together evidence for some of their claims, they come to this particular moment. And here you have, quite in front of you, statements from Bob Arum as well as other promoters in boxing, Lou DiBella, who basically note the reality of boxing is that 80% or, upwards of 70% end up going to the fighter, and then the house basically takes the rest of it. I mean, it's obviously split a few more ways than that, but you get the idea. It's a 70 to 80% split with the fighters, and the UFC is the exact opposite. It's not just the case with Bob Arum. It's not just the case with Lou DiBella. In fact, they go through Golden Boy in the same document, and their numbers are pretty similar. I think they were in the mid to high 70s in terms of what percent.
So these are, a number of boxing promotions. Golden Boy, You're talking about Bob Arum, Top Rank. You're talking about a number of boxing promotions, and they're all around the same, percentage going to the fighter.
Percentage the fighters ultimately got in terms of a payout. Just on basic math, they're up against it on this particular case. The UFC and Dana White in particular has noted, listen, our model works, the UFC model works. And certainly for them, it does, to the point where they have established a monopoly inside of mixed martial arts. But you can't have it both ways. You can't take 80%, leaving the fighters 20% or less, which we know from these same court documents is the case, this in perpetuity 20% or less as a fixed cost for what UFC fighters will be paid, and then also make the case that you could just make more fighting over here. It can't be both.
So, as you guys can see, like, the UFC's, basically paying their fighters 15 to 20%. Like, that is so egregious. And you're talking about boxing, close to 80% is going to the fighter. Boxing promotions are doing really well compensating their fighters. Now, you can make the argument that the UFC is able to have a huge roster and, they pay a lot of fighters and all these things, and boxing is not that way. They're paying a select amount of people, so they don't have to, they're not really taking care of a lot of fighters, right? Whereas UFC is like, we got like 400 fighters and, we're taking care of all of them. But what does it mean if you're not, getting any? Like, some fighters in the UFC are literally holding down jobs and fighting for the UFC. Come on, man.